Welcome to Cambridge Forum. I'm Jamie Paglia, Program Manager of the Forum. This year, Cambridge Forum is celebrating its 35th anniversary of bringing you live public programs for the discussion of the issues and ideas that are shaping our world. Before we begin our program, I want to extend a word of caution to listeners that the controversial content of our discussion may offend some audience members. The centerpiece of this forum is Professor Randall Kennedy's new book, which explores what is arguably the most incendiary word in the English language. The book is titled Nigger, The Strange Career of a Troublesome Word. With 4 centuries of history behind it, the word's utterance conjures immediate images of violence and hatred. Use of the word has incited riots, destroyed careers, and ended lives. Today, many African Americans have reclaimed the word as a term of endearment, brotherhood, and solidarity. Does using the word in a non-derisive way diminish its negative power? Should the word ever be used by blacks or whites, regardless of context? Can we separate emotion from lexicon to discuss its evolution from a historical standpoint? Is this even valuable? Here to lead our exploration of these sensitive questions is Harvard University Law School Professor Randall Kennedy, author of the critically acclaimed Race, Crime, and the Law. Professor Kennedy received his undergraduate degree from Princeton University and his law degree from Yale University. A Rhodes Scholar, he served as a law clerk to Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall before beginning his career at Harvard in 1984. The author of dozens of articles focused on race and the law, his work has appeared in the Boston Globe, The Nation, the American Prospect, Time magazine, and the Wall Street Journal, just to name a few. Welcome to Cambridge Forum, Randall Kennedy.
I'd like to thank the Forum for making this space available to me and for making this space available to all of us. This is a great treat for any author, and I'm very appreciative. I'd like to proceed in the following way. I'd like to talk about my book for approximately 20 minutes, and then I'd like to subside and turn a monologue into a dialogue. And I would like to encourage your questions, your suggestions, your corrections, and by all means, any objections that anyone might have. My book is about the history of the term nigger. It's about this very special slur. One of the reasons why I devoted time and energy to this enterprise is because this particular slur is actually rather special. The American language is dotted with all sorts of slurs. Kike, dago, wetback, chink, gook, one could go on and on. Nigger, in many respects, is rather special. It's the paradigmatic racial slur. In saying that, by the way, I don't mean to claim that in any particular instance the target of nigger as insult is in any greater jeopardy than the target of any of these other racial slurs. The young Jewish kid running from a gang of thugs saying "kill the kike" is likely to be as terrified, and for good reason, as a black kid running from a gang of thugs saying "kill the nigger." But from a macro level, from a broader perspective, I think that nigger is actually quite special. This is a debatable topic, and in question and answer, let's debate it, but I'm going to set forth the proposition that nigger is special. And among the reasons why I say this is that nigger is the only epithet I know of that has generated other epithets. So, for instance, when people want to heap contempt upon Native Americans, they call them timber niggers. When people want to heap contempt upon the Irish, they call them the niggers of Europe. When people want to heap contempt on Arabs, sand niggers. So nigger serves as this sort of the gold standard for racial insult. There's another reason why I think that nigger is quite special at this moment. It still has a currency that I think is unlike any of these other epithets. The moment that triggered this enterprise for me was a Saturday many months ago when in my office at Harvard Law School I decided to type Nigger into the LexisNexis data program. And I asked for the data program to give me citations for every state court case and federal court case in which the word nigger appeared. I got over 4,000 citations. I then did the same maneuver, but used as the key word other racial, ethnic epithets. And the difference was extraordinary. There was nothing that came close to the salience of nigger. Now, of course, one could quibble with that. Of course, court opinions are by no means a clear mirror on society. One, in fact, might argue that perhaps it's just that people are more attentive to nigger than other epithets. And I talk about that, and again, we can discuss this, but it seems to me that the salience of nigger in the law, the salience of nigger on the streets, the salience of nigger in popular culture, I think distinguishes it from other words that have historically been racial insults. Now, in trying to bring the history of this word to life, I tried to show how this is a word that has actually had a life-changing effect on people. So let me give you two stories. I started reading autobiographies and biographies of African Americans. And actually, after a while, it became a rather easy enterprise to come across the nigger story. There typically was one. Early on, I didn't have to do a whole lot of digging. Early on, I would come across the nigger story. And I'll give you two. Both are lawyer stories. Let me start off with Paul Robeson. Paul Robeson, the great singer, the great actor, the political activist. Paul Robeson wanted to be an attorney. Paul Robeson went to the Columbia Law School. After his first year at the Columbia Law School, Paul Robeson got a job at a law firm. Early on in the summer, he calls in a secretary to take some dictation. The secretary goes storming into his office, throws down her pencil and pad and says, "I don't take dictation from niggers," and storms out. And Paul Robeson decided, well, he didn't think after that he had much of a chance in the law. Let me give you another example of nigger actually changing the trajectory of a person's life. Benjamin Jefferson Davis. Benjamin Jefferson Davis was a black man from Georgia. He went to law school right over here at Harvard Law School. He goes back to Georgia, where almost immediately upon returning, he gets involved in the defense of Angelo Herndon. Angelo Herndon was a black communist who was facing a trial for insurrection. This was very important stuff because there was a death sentence awaiting him upon conviction. So Benjamin Jefferson Davis represents Herndon, and during the trial, witnesses and the district attorney referred to Herndon as a nigger. And Davis jumped up and said, "Judge, I object to this. I object to this. This is totally improper. Please instruct the witnesses and the district attorney not to refer to my client by that term." The judge leans back and says, "Well, yeah, you got a point there." And he instructs the district attorney to refrain from calling Herndon a nigger and says, "No, call that boy a darky." Now, there was a conviction, and this particular trial had such a radicalizing effect on Davis that almost immediately after the trial, he himself joined the Communist Party of the United States. And in fact, he became one of the leaders of the Communist Party in 1948 during the famous Smith Act prosecutions when the leading members of the Communist Party were thrown into jail. Benjamin Jefferson Davis was one of them. Again, a life-changing episode. And I go through a number of those. Let me just say one other thing. I don't want to make it seem, and I didn't want to make it seem in the book, that nigger as insult is consigned to our history. Nigger as insult still has very much currency. And to try to bring this home, I give examples of people with authority, corrections officers, police officers, judges, using nigger as insult. I also go on that most modern of forums, the internet, and I talk about what one finds at KKK Comedy Central, the Nigger Ghetto Gazette, where one finds page after page after page of jokes like the following. What do you call a nigger boy riding a bike? Answer, thief. Why do decent white folks shop at nigger yard sales? To get all their stuff back, of course. Let me just give one more. What's the difference between a pothole and a nigger? You'd swerve to avoid a pothole, wouldn't you? Now, I don't say those things to gratuitously offend anybody or to singe anybody's sensibilities. This is part of our world, and it is part of the ongoing history of our subject. Now, the term would be interesting and worthy of study if it were only used as an insult. If that were the only way in which it was used, it would still, it seems to me, warrant study. But it's even more interesting because that's not the only way it's used. Nigger, or some people would say nigga, and some people make a big distinction between N-I-G-G-E-R and N-I-G-G-A. I'll be happy to talk about that distinction later in our question and answer period. But nigger or nigga, or, and by the way, nigger has been spelled all sorts of ways over its 400-year history. N-I-G-G-U-H, N-I-G-G-O-R, N-I-G-G-E-R. But this word has been used in a wide variety of ways. And one way in which it's used is as a term of affectionate salutation. I certainly have friends, and members of my family for that matter, who have embraced me lovingly with the term nigger. Good to see you, my nigger. Now, that's intensely controversial, I know that. Many people abhor that, think that's a terrible thing to say. But as a sociological matter, I think it's irrefutable that there are people who use the term as a gesture of affection, as a symbol of solidarity. Well, let me give a couple of examples. Ice-T says in one of his songs, I'm a nigger, not a colored man or a black or a Negro or an African American. Ice Cube, for his part, dubs himself the nigga you love to hate. And then there's Beanie Siegel, or Seigel, who promises, I'm a ride with my niggas, die with my niggas, get high with my niggas, split pies with my niggas, till my body gets hard, soul touch the sky, till my number gets cold and God shuts my eyes. I mean, anybody who listens to many aspects of hip-hop culture will be familiar with this use of the word nigger. And I talk about this use of the word nigger. Just briefly, what explains that? Well, for some people, it's just habit. They've heard other people use the term in this way, and so they use it in this way. Some people use the term in the way I just noted, advisedly. They are very self-consciously attempting to transform the meaning of the word, as have many gay people sought to transform the word, the term queer. In other words, there are some black people who have we understand that this word nigger was meant to oppress us. We understand that this word nigger has been thrown at us in an attempt to make us feel ashamed of ourselves. We understand that this word nigger has been thrown at us in an effort to strike fear in our hearts. But guess what? That campaign failed. It didn't work. We're not ashamed. We're not afraid. We have overcome, and one way of showing that is that we're going to use the word nigger in a very different way than anti-black bigots meant for the word to be used. Now, so I think that's enough about the history of the word. I suppose that the one thing that I think that this history does show is the validity of a comment that was made by a famous Cambridgian, Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, who observed that a word is not a crystal, transparent, and unchanged. A word is instead the skin of a living thought that may vary greatly in color and content according to the circumstances and the time in which it is used. And it seems to me that the history of nigger fully substantiates Holmes's observation. My book has two other sections to it. The middle section is a section about nigger in court. And that section attempts to survey the important ways in which the American legal system has had to grapple with this term. And I talk about this term and the law of evidence, the First Amendment, tort law, the law of homicide. And it's surprising the extent to which nigger has been wrestled with by judges in the courts. Let me just give one instance, It's an instance that'll be very familiar to most people in here. Imagine that there's a criminal trial. Imagine that there's a key witness. Imagine that the defense wants to bring to the attention of the jury that the key witness, a white police officer, habitually refers to black people as niggers. Let's also imagine that the defendant is black. Question: should the judge allow the defense to bring to the attention of the jury the witness's constant use of the word nigger as a derogatory reference to black people? Of course, I'm making reference to the O.J. Simpson case. But there are hundreds, I remember what I said, there are 4,000 cases where in all sorts of domains courts have had to grapple with this term. Finally, in the final chapter of my book, it's a chapter called Pitfalls in Fighting Nigger. I talk about instances in which, in my view, people have responded wrongly to controversies generated by the use of the word nigger. And I'm going to end my comments by just retailing a story, but it's a story that it's one of the most memorable that I came across in my research. It's a story that comes to us from Michigan. There was a basketball coach, white basketball coach, who had a team. There were 4 black players on the team, 1 white player. The team was losing at halftime. The coach at halftime brings the team back into the locker room and he says, "Listen, fellas, we're losing. I need to talk with you very directly. Can I talk with you very directly?" They say, "Yes." He says, "Okay, now listen. I want to use the N-word in the way in which you use the N-word. Can I do that?" And they say, "Yes." Now, what he meant by that, he didn't spell all this out, but what he meant by that was that in practice, the players would use the following term. They would say, "You're playing like a nigger." And if you were playing like a nigger, that meant that you were playing with a lot of heart, a lot of concentration, a lot of verve. It was a compliment. So the coach wanted to use the term in that way. So the coach turns to the one white ball player and says, so-and-so here is playing like a nigger. Then he turns to one of the black players and he says, so-and-so here is playing like a nigger. Then he turns to one of the other players and says, now so-and-so here is playing like a half nigger. And then he turns to the other two and he says, we're losing because you all are not playing like niggers at all. I need 5 niggers on the court. They go back out, they lose. But that's just the beginnings of the problem. That's just the beginning of the problem for this coach. To make a long story short, the coach loses his job. He's fired. There were various protests. He was suspended for a while. There was mandatory sensitivity training and various things. But ultimately, he was fired. This firing prompted 2 lawsuits. One lawsuit was initiated by the students on the team. One of the reasons why the coach was fired, this was a public university, one of the reasons why the coach was fired was because this coach had allegedly violated the school speech code. And the members of the team went into federal court and attacked the speech code on federal constitutional grounds. And they won. They succeeded in having the court strike down the speech code. The coach went into federal court to try to get his job back. He lost for legal reasons I needn't get into here. The question I ask in the book is, was it a good thing to fire the coach, given the circumstances, given what he was attempting to accomplish, given what the team thought he was attempting to accomplish? What should he have been fired? My own sense of things was that no, he shouldn't have been fired. The athletic director told him that it had gotten out, it had sort of gotten out on campus the nature of the nature of this locker room speech had gotten out on campus. It had become public knowledge. The athletic director said, this was a very imprudent thing to do, much too susceptible to misunderstanding. So don't do it again. And the coach said, fine, I won't do it again. But as I've indicated, it didn't stop there. Ultimately, the coach was fired. My view, the coach ought not have been fired given the surrounding circumstances. Now, I've had lots of discussions about this. Some people agree with me, some people disagree. But it's episodes like that, and there are many others, but episodes like that I detail in my 3rd chapter. I think I've said enough. I think I've given you some sense of the terrain that I attempt to cover in my book. And at this point, I'm going to subside, and you get the first question, I understand.
You are joining us at Cambridge Forum, listening to Randall Kennedy discussing Nigger, the strange career of a troublesome word. I think I will ask the first question because there was recently a re-airing of the Fox Network episode of Boston Public. I don't know, many of you may have seen it. The central plot line focused on a white teacher's decision to use Professor Kennedy's book in class for a discussion on race issues after there's an altercation between some students when one of them refers to somebody else in the friendly way of the term. Ultimately, the teacher is almost fired. He's a white teacher, but he challenges the principal to step in. And the students want to hear, they want to talk about this, and he challenges him to come in and teach the class, and he does. It's an African-American principal. I'm curious, Professor Kennedy, what your feelings were about their solution to that.
Let me say a little bit about the Boston Public episode. A while back, the people who do Boston Public called me up and said they were thinking about doing a show involving this sort of controversy. They had heard about this book. They wanted to get a copy. I sent a copy out. Then they sent me the script. wanted my feedback on the script, wanted permission to use the book and my name. I thought it was an interesting script. I thought it was a very probing discussion of many of the issues and sub-issues that are related. I don't think that as to the resolution, I don't think that the people that were putting on Boston Public meant to suggest that this was an ideal resolution. I think that what they meant to do was to present a controversy and to present one way in which a controversy like this might be resolved. But I do not get the sense, as just a watcher of the program, that the producers were saying this is the way it ought to be resolved. Now, if you're asking, should a white teacher be able to discuss nigger in class? My answer is absolutely. Imagine this, and this is an issue that's arising all over the United States. Imagine that a teacher, white, I don't care, white, black, Asian American, Latino, doesn't matter to me. Imagine a teacher is talking about the language of bigotry. Imagine a teacher wants to have a discussion or even a course about the language of bigotry. Well, how can you have such a discussion? How can you have such a course without the teacher confronting the word nigger? Now, there are teachers who have, in fact, been disciplined for doing just this. There's a teacher, for instance, at a community college in Kentucky who was actually conducting this particular session was a session about tabooed words. The teacher asked the students, well, give me some tabooed words, some tabooed expressions. So some were thrown out, and eventually nigger was thrown out as one. And so they were talking about these various words, including nigger. And a student, by the way, there were a number of black students in the class, but there was one black student who, at sort of halftime during the class, went up to the teacher and said, I really don't like this. I find this offensive. And the teacher said, well, if you want to absent yourself, if you want to leave, I understand. We can get you the notes. So certainly won't be any penalty affixed to you. It didn't end there, though. The student complained to a local leader. The local leader complained to the president of the community college. And the next year, this teacher was without a job. This case is now being litigated. This particular episode is by no means idiosyncratic. It's an issue that comes up. And it seems to me that nigger is an important topic. It's a topic that has much ugliness associated with it, much pain associated with it. In that sense, it's like the subject of lynching. But it's certainly a subject about which more Americans should be aware, and it seems to me that teachers, regardless of their background, ought to be allowed to broach this subject with students.
Thank you. You are listening to Randall Kennedy discussing his new book, Nigger, The Strange Career of a Troublesome Word. The floor is now open for your questions and comments. Go ahead.
I'm wondering about the derivation of the word. Early on you said it had a 400-year history, and I'm wondering, is it uniquely American or is it European of some sort? And then I was thinking on that vein, I was wondering if Shakespeare used the word.
Nigger is thought to be derived from the Latin word for the color black, N-I-G-E-R. It is used, we find it in English, spelled in different ways in the 1600s. One interesting thing about some of the uses in the 1600s, there's some people who use nigger or spellings very similar to it in ways that do not appear to have been intended to be derogatory. So, for instance, Samuel Sewall In The Selling of Joseph, one of the early anti-slavery tracts refers to blacks as niggers, but doesn't seem to be using it in a derogatory way. By the 1800s, nigger has clearly become a widely used slur, a widely used term of derogation. One of the documents that I found most helpful in trying to piece together the early history of nigger is a document with the following title: A Treatise on the Intellectual Character and Civil and Political Condition of the Colored People of the United States and the Prejudice Exercised Toward Them. This was published in 1837. It was written by Hosea Easton, a free black man, who wrote the following: Nigger is an opprobrious term employed to impose contempt upon blacks as an inferior race. Listen to the next sentence, which I think is a very interesting sentence. The term in itself would be perfectly harmless were it used only to distinguish one class of society from another. But it is not used with that intent. It flows from the fountain of purpose to injure. And then Easton talks about the way in which white adults instructed their children constantly using the word nigger. So he talks about the way in which white adults would reprimand their children for being, quote, worse than niggers, for being ignorant as niggers, for having no more credit than niggers. He talks about white adults disciplining their children by telling these children that unless they behaved, they would be carried off by the old nigger, or made to sit with niggers, or consigned to the nigger seat, which was, of course, a place of shame. And again, this is in 1837. So, clearly by 1837, nigger as insult had already laid down fairly deep roots.
Next question.
It seems to me our society is becoming more and more politically correct fanatics. Do you think someday in the maybe not too distant future, the word black will be in the same category as nigger, and we'll have to use Afro-Americans for black people today?
No, I think that one of the very good things that has happened over the past half century or more is that nigger as insult has been thoroughly, not sufficiently, but pretty strongly stigmatized. So it wasn't that long ago that there were politicians who thought nothing of referring to black people in the most derisive way as niggers on the floor of the House of Representatives, on the floor of the Senate of the United States. That doesn't happen anymore, thank goodness. Now, why do I say thank goodness? I say thank goodness because that use of the word nigger was obviously intended to pour contempt upon a people. It was obviously intended as a racial slur, a racial insult. And that ought not be tolerated, and public opinion, for the most part, won't tolerate it. If that is political correctness, then I say all up with political correctness. Again, it seems to me that one needs to be careful in several respects. One of the reasons why I am against people who would like to expunge nigger totally from our culture is because I think we ought to know about the history of the word nigger. I think it's very important to know that there were politicians who used nigger this way until fairly recently. By the way, you won't know that from reading the congressional record. The congressional record, people should know, is a cleaned up record. You will know what politicians said, often really said through reporters or through other sorts of witnesses. And it's through other sorts of witnesses that we know the way in which politicians have used the word nigger openly. Now, I think that this stigmatization of nigger is with us to stay, and I don't see any going back on that, though others do. Arthur Clarke, the science fiction writer, has a science fiction story located sometime late in this century where he posits that nigger will be no different than Democrat, little d Democrat, or little r Republican, or little s socialist, or any other sort of. He thinks nigger will have lost much of the meaning that we currently attach to it. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think my sense is that the word will continually evolve. I think that the word will be used in ways that will be surprising to people. I think that some people, for instance, will be surprised to know that, in San Francisco, there are Asian American kids who embrace one another and say, good to see you, my nigger. That there are white kids who embrace one another saying the same thing. They don't mean it as an insult at all. Now, so I think that the word, and especially with technology being what it is, the possibilities of seepage, the possibilities of the use of a word in a particular movie, or the use of a word in a video, the use of a word in a popular song, these things go around the world, and they go around the world very quickly. So I think that the word is going to evolve in all sorts of ways. I think that it will be with us. I don't think that the word nigger is, in 50 years, I feel very confident that it will be part of American culture. But I think as a part of, in a sense, the formal language in this country, the public language of this country insofar as politics is concerned, that the word has been stigmatized and will remain stigmatized.
I guess I have two questions sort of triggered by the Boston public. So I'm a white public school teacher. I taught 2 years in New Orleans, and now I'm teaching here. And every New Orleans, and now I teach in Boston. And every year I sort of have always ended up talking to my kids about race, whether first grade, second grade, or ninth grade, 12th grade. And so I remember my first year I was talking to Kelsey, and she was talking about white people are this and that. I'm like, well, what about me? And she's like, you're not white, you're red. And I'm like, all right, sort of light-skinned black. And then just last month, Jose, he walks in my class, and I don't know what he's talking about, but he's like, Mr. Meyer, he's my main nigger. And so I guess my question to you, in your book, you sort of talk about the co-optation of black culture by whites, and how nigger is sort of setting cultural turf. And I guess I want to hear more about that and how it's used in that way. And then my second question, I guess I'll ask later.
Well, frankly, I'm not quite sure what you're driving at.
I guess my question is so there are lots of social things attached to the outside, but just me in my classroom, what would be the dynamics of if Jose says I'm his main nigger and I'm like, yeah, you're mine, what sort of usage of the word, I guess, would you see as a useful use in the context versus a non-useful function of it?
Two things I'll say, and lately I've been hearing a lot from teachers, and one thing I always say when they email me is that teachers have a far more daunting task than the task that I took on. And you were just talking about people in the second grade. Goodness, I have no idea what one says to people in the second grade, frankly. One thing, my general approach would be to speak as openly and carefully and fully as possible, trying to communicate to people that there are a lot of things to take into account when using language. There is your own personal intent, and for me that's very important. But that's not the only thing to take into account. Every day, all of us, in conducting ourselves, are not only concerned with what we intend, but we're also concerned with how we appear. And so the question of mistake, the question of misunderstanding, My rule of thumb is that somebody ought not use this word, given its history, without being able to give a good explanation for why they are using it. And that's my rule of thumb. So I think it's presumptively a bad word which people ought not use unless they can give a justification for using it. I think there's some people who can give a good justification for using it, and I give a bunch of examples of people who use it, and I am not offended by their use of it. Lenny Bruce comes to mind, Richard Pryor comes to mind, Chris Rock comes to mind, Dick Gregory comes to mind, Quentin Tarantino comes to mind. But those are people who use the word. I think if you press them, they could tell you why they were doing it. And I think that each of those people has really illuminated our culture in interesting and useful ways. If a person can't give an explanation, I think that they ought to stay clear of it.
Okay. And then
I'm going to ask a quick question, and then I think we need to get to the next person, if that's okay. Thanks. In that vein, Professor Kennedy, you obviously have taken a considerable amount of heat for using the title for your book. I'm curious if the response that you've received was what you expected when you made that decision.
Let me say something about the question of the title. First of all, let me make it clear that whatever one thinks about the title should be placed at my feet. I was the one who insisted that the word that nigger be the main title of the book. There's some people who suggested that this was the brainchild of the publisher. Not so. This book was built upon several speeches, two that I gave out at Stanford. Those lectures were called "Who Can Say Nigger and Other Related Questions." The other lecture was at the University of Illinois Law School, and it was called "Nigger in Court." So clearly, in the lectures and in this book, I made the decision that I wanted nigger to be front and center with respect to the title. Having said that, let me say a bit more. One criticism, very sharp criticism and a consistent criticism has been, well, this is just pure sensationalism. This is just some guy wanting to sell books. That's disreputable. Now, my response to that is, in large part, confession. Yes, I definitely want people to buy my book. I did not write the book in a way that was intended to not be read. I wanted people to read it. I spent a lot of time thinking about the question of length, thinking about all sorts of issues, including the title. Now, with respect to the title, I thought it could cut in a variety of ways. I didn't really talk with my publisher about it, but I remember on January 8th, the official publication date of the book, when the book came out, I remember going to bookstores in Harvard Square, and I wanted to see if the book was going to be out. Because I thought, I can imagine that, bookstores might hide the book. And I was very pleasantly, that certainly did not happen here. And by and large, it has not happened. The book has, in fact, sold very well. And I'm not going to pretend that I'm indifferent to that. I'm happy about that. When people have challenged me about this, oftentimes the challenge comes in a bookstore, and I say, listen, we're in a bookstore. So let's just do something. We're surrounded by books on shelves. Take a look at that shelf. Go down the list. Just look. Do you think that the author thought about the title? Do you think that the author thought about a title that would, first of all, clue people to what the book was about, and second of all, prompt people to at least take a peek into the book? I think that authors do that. Of course they do that. just like headline writers and newspapers, just like the first paragraph of a strong magazine article. You need a strong lead paragraph. All of that is about the strategy of presentation of an idea, about trying to get people to read and take seriously what you have to say. And was that partly on my mind? Sure. And to a large extent, it has been successful. I'm quite happy about it.
Thanks for clarifying that. Next question.
Thanks for taking my question. You've talked a little bit about the fact that this word can be used, in the sort of academic environment, whether it's a public school or a public university. And the examples that I think that you've given are somewhat misguided, because the examples that you've given haven't really showed us that the word can be used as a term of abuse or as a term that can deeply wound the recipient of this sort of attack. So my question is, when the words are used in these sorts of contexts, not like the sort of context that we're in right now in which we can sort of examine it very, very clinically, but when these words are used on the street to hurt somebody, how do you think that the law should govern those sorts of interactions?
Sure. Fine. There are many ways in which nigger appears in the context that I think is relevant to your concern. So, for instance, if you go to LexisNexis and put Nigger within 30 spaces and then put in arson, you will get dozens of cases. You'll get dozens of cases. And oftentimes these are cases in which there will be regular arson cases, but oftentimes there will also be federal civil rights cases. A regular sort of state crime will be transformed into a federal crime by the use of the word nigger. There are just scores of cases where the person torches the neighbor's house, the person is caught, witnesses come forth, and the question is, why this person torched the person's house? And, a neighbor will say, oh, I heard the guy talking. And the guy said, I don't want to live next to a nigger. I don't want to live next to a nigger lover. So the presence of the word nigger might very definitely have an effect on the legal ramifications of that particular crime. Or give you another example. Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act protects people, or at least many people. It doesn't protect everybody, but it protects many people in their workplaces. Many people in workplaces are covered by Title VII. They're covered, they are protected against hostile environments. There are many, many cases every year that involve racially hostile environments. Many of these cases involve the word nigger. Nigger is part of the evidence that the employer has itself or himself or herself sought to run an employee away, or in many cases an employer has not done anything when a coworker has attempted to undercut the productivity of a worker or attempted to run somebody away. Do I think that the law should provide protection to people under those circumstances? Yes, I do. Or give you another example, tort law. There's a tort called the intentional infliction of emotional distress. It's a rather rare tort, but under some circumstances, you can get damages if somebody acts toward you in an absolutely extraordinary way. A couple of years ago, there was a case in Florida where some kids graduated from high school and sent an email to a teacher, black teacher, called the teacher all sorts of names, threatened the teacher. Nigger was very much part of this, and nigger figured into the tort action. Do I think that that's a good thing, that nigger ought to figure into a tort action like that? The answer is yes.
First of all, I want to applaud your intellectual courage for engaging this topic. And second, I should say this. I work at a university across the river where, unfortunately, we have less than 3% of the student population being students of color, African-American students. But in that capacity, I get to overhear a lot of student conversations. And Now, bearing in mind there are very few African American students in the school, this is a statement, a kind of statement I hear regularly, and you said it here. Two white kids, two European Americans walking up to you and saying, hey, my nigger, hey, my nigger. Now, what my question for you is, how is this kind of cultural appropriation any different than the kind of slumming that European Americans used to do in Harlem prior to World War II?
Well, I'm conflicted in my response because I think there is such a phenomenon as slumming in the sense of actually thinking less well of people and almost sort of playing around with, in a sense, their cultural artifacts or their gestures or their perceived way of doing things. And people, sort of are doing that, but they're looking down their nose at them. That's sort of the sense I have at slumming. And if people are doing that, that's a bad thing. On the other hand, there have been instances where whites have been accused of being engaged in slumming, and I don't actually think that they were. So, for instance, I talk in the book about a controversy involving the term nigger. It's a controversy that arose from a novel published by Carl Van Vechten. Carl Van Vechten in the early 1930s, I believe, published a book called Nigger Heaven. Now, there were some black people who thought Carl Van Vechten is slumming. And they were and just detested his title and just detested him doing this book. In fact, one of Van Vechten's closest friends up to that point, I believe, had been County Cullen. And County Cullen just had a complete falling out with Van Vechten over that book. Now, that's true. But then there were some other people, one of my favorite people of all time, James Weldon Johnson, was a big fan of Carl Van Vechten and a big fan of Nigger Heaven. Now, the question of, what is slumming, what isn't slumming, sometimes it's hard to tease out. Is somebody genuinely attracted to certain gestures, a way of being, a type of language, and, in a thoroughgoing, authentic, good way, embracing it? Or is a person looking down their nose at it? I think it's very tough to sort of separate those things out often. But if people are being patronizing, if they're being condescending, that's bad. If they are attempting to do what many people do with culture, that is, pick up this thing they like, this thing they like, this thing they like, in an attempt to make a better world for themselves, it's fine by me.
Next question.
I'd like to say something in defense of a certain use of it, of the term nigger. I think what isn't being brought out here is I think a lot of times white people use that term in disgust or because they've been victimized by blacks, by their violence, their criminality. I think there's a huge element of that in white usage. And also I think that a lot of us, I can speak for myself, a lot of us do perceive white people as being a more refined race, and I think we are genuinely compared to blacks in general. And
Finish your comment.
Let's
Finish your comment.
Everybody, we're going to wrap this up, and then we're going to let our speaker respond.
Finish your comment. Go ahead.
well, that's my understanding of things. I have a right to my view, in spite of these people who would silence me. And I think that's part of the perception on the part of white people. Whether you agree with it or not, I think you should at least recognize that is what we believe in, what we perceive. And we have our reasons. I don't say all of us, but there are many of us who do.
Well, I mean, first of all, of course, in a forum like this, it's completely impossible for me to say everything that's in a book. But at one level, I have no doubt that what you say is true. I have no doubt that there are people who, because of an encounter with a person, generalizes from that encounter and damns a whole group of people. Of course that happens. And of course that's one of the great banes of the world. That is, one of the great problems that we confront, people overgeneralizing in that way, people thinking that humanity is divided up along a hierarchy in which certain people are, quote, more refined than other people. I'm aware that people, think that, and in fact, I think that one would, KKK Comedy Central indicates that quite clearly, and I actually made reference to that. That's so. I mean, to that extent, what you say is true. The big difference is, how we evaluate that way of thinking. Apparently, you don't see anything wrong with that way of thinking, and I do see something wrong with that way of thinking.
Also, could I just make one small point?
Next question.
All right.
Hi. One of my favorite comedians is Chris Rock, and I was watching his comedy the other night, and he said something along the lines of there's a civil war within the black culture, and it's between blacks and niggers. And he was definitely referring to niggers in a negative way, and I felt kind of like that he was reinforcing some of the stereotypes around the word nigger, and definitely was using a negative term against African Americans. And I love Chris Rock, and I really love satirical comedy. I grew up with Richard Pryor using nigger, and all of those, and a lot of the ways that they use it is definitely, I understand the satirical side of it and the way that you're poking fun of, like, the world, but he was definitely using this in kind of a different context than what I usually hear the word used in comedy, and I was wondering what your thoughts were about people who use nigger, but use African Americans specifically who use nigger in a negative way.
First of all, I think that you are right in your comment. And I'm a little bit, it's unclear. I mean, two things could be going on there. It could be that he himself is truly in his own voice using the word in that way. Or it could be that he is dramatizing the way in which people do use that word. I mean, one of the reasons why that particular skit always provokes such big applause is because people, certainly many black people, have heard it before. It's not like he was being completely, it wasn't like what he was saying was novel. What was novel was that he was saying it openly on HBO before a big audience. And I don't mean to minimize, I mean, he's obviously a wonderful comedian, but I mean, the resonance there, I mean, I've been in many barber shops where people have said exactly the same thing. Now, I do agree with you, though, and I think that for purposes of the afterword I will write for the next edition of this book, I think I will say something along those lines, though, because it is true that there is a use, and actually I make reference to this in the book as written, but I don't think I underline it enough. It is true that one stream in the history of the word nigger, particularly one stream in the history of the African American use of the word nigger, is that stream which is involved in a deeply self-denigrating attitude. And I think, it could be that Chris Rock is actually giving voice to that. Again, sometimes it's difficult to actually read an artistic performance. Is he giving voice to it, or is he himself satirizing it? but it's certainly there to some extent, and I think I need to do more to sort of tease that out. I think it's a very nice comment.
So I'm not an American, and so this might be a more question coming out of my cultural baggage, I guess. But do you worry that focusing on the single word diverts attention from what's really a wider issue of prejudice? I mean, when you talk about arson and the use of the word nigger, it's about prejudice, it's about racism. Why are you so focused on the word, I guess?
I talk about prejudice. I talk about racism. I use nigger as the lens through which I get at broader themes. One of the, I don't think that one can, in a useful way, talk but so generally. It's good to be specific. It's good to have concrete cases, concrete examples. One of the things I like about this term is actually its concreteness. Now, one other thing I should say, on a number of occasions there have been people in audiences who've expressed disappointment and have said something like the following: why in the world are you focusing on this? Aren't there more important things to talk about? And again, my response is, I have no doubt that there are more important things to talk about. Truly. I do not make the claim that of all the books you should read this year, read this one if you read no other one. That is not part of my, as much as I hope that people will read this, I would never make that claim. I don't think that this particular subject is the end-all and be-all. There are many important things to talk about, but, there are many important things to talk about. So, for instance, if there was a poet next week who wanted to come here and had just written a new book, a new interpretation about the poems of John Donne, fine. That's great. I think people should appreciate the poems of John Donne or Shakespeare or the novels and, Zora Neale Hurston or all sorts of things. The idea that one should only focus one's attention on, the most important things, that's just not the way that people operate. People's interests are piqued by certain things. Hopefully you talk about things that are of interest and that have some degree of merit to them. And it seems to me that after an author does that, that's all that I demand.
This is not a question as much as I'm wondering what you would say about it. I'm older, grew up in a culture where there were people who loved me deeply, and I loved them, who were black. And it was wrong because in the context in which it was done, they were supposedly inferior to me. And there were grown-ups, there were adults in that community who loved the fact that they loved me and I loved them. There were also adults in the community who taught me that it was wrong. And I wonder how many people have had this confusing, it's not, maybe not confusing, but this kind of track, these two tracks to follow, and what people have been able to do with it. And of course, I don't think it's happening so much anymore. It certainly doesn't happen nearly as much in the North as in the South.
Well, I mean, well, let me just respond this way. I think that the phenomena that you just discussed is actually a fairly widespread, was certainly widespread in the South, especially in an earlier time. It is a phenomena that is deeply embedded in American history. I have a book coming out actually in September on interracial intimacies, marriage, adoption, sex, that grapples with some of what you just described. But I think actually that this ambivalence, this confusion, this funny mix of love, hate, repulsion, attraction is very much a part of the race question in American life, and one of the things that makes it so intractable, so fascinating, so convoluted, so complex. Yes, sir.
My name is James Howard. I have the question of why do you think people use the word? I don't want to use the word. I'm not out to condemn it or to agree with it. I just want to know why people use the word.
Well, I think people use it for all sorts of reasons. There's some people who use it because they know it's an insult and they want to hurt people. They want to show contempt for people. There's some people who use it in a way in which, because they want to, in a sense, hold up a mirror and show that people use the word. So Dick Gregory titled his autobiography in 1964, Nigger, an autobiography. He was holding up a mirror on American society. He didn't want to, he said, hey, let's not pretend that people don't use this word in the way, as an insult. It is used in this way, and it has very important consequences, and let's show the way in which it's used. There are other people who use it, as I indicated earlier, to try to flip it around, to essentially try to stick their tongue out at this word that has historically been used as an insult. So people, I think, use it for a wide variety of reasons.
I have a question about the reaction to the word, and maybe the history of that instead of the usage of it, moving it more towards the side of blacks' reaction to whites or others using the word. How do you think that has changed over the years from maybe a progression of accepting it and keep on walking to more of a, what did you say to me, what did you say to me, come over here? And how do you think that relates to the whole, I don't want to say empowerment without an explanation, because I think empowerment means more of a broad sense of equality or search for equality, but more of a empowerment in the sense of empowerment where the mainstream agrees that violence is necessary or a violent reaction is necessary.
I'm not, that's a nice the history of sort of blacks' response to whites' use of the word. I think that first of all, let me read something that I think is one of the more powerful statements in the book. This is from Langston Hughes. And this statement, I think, voices a point of view that many people who really dislike my book feel. And, I say that with all due respect. Here's the statement. I think it's a very powerful statement. I think it has a real punch behind it. This is Langston Hughes, writing in 1940. The word nigger to colored people of high and low degree is like a red rag to a bull. Used rightly or wrongly, ironically or seriously, of necessity for the sake of realism, or impishly for the sake of comedy, it doesn't matter. Negroes do not like it in any book or play whatsoever, be the book or play ever so sympathetic in its treatment of the basic problems of the race. The word nigger, you see, sums up for us who are colored all the bitter years of insult and struggle in America. So, I think that there are a substantial number of black people who take the position nobody should use this word. And would like to erase the word entirely. There are some people, black people, who take the position, white people ought never use this word under any circumstances, regardless of their intention. But black people should be privileged to use this word as a satirical device, as a salutation of affection, etc. Then there are other people black people who take the position, and this is my position, that anybody who uses the word nigger as a term of abuse, as a term of insult, ought to be condemned for doing so. But that leaves open other uses of the word, and with respect to those other uses of the word, I have an open mind. Again, I think the word, given its history, is presumptively bad, but it's only presumptively bad. I've already indicated that there are people who have used it in ways that I don't find offensive.
Along those lines, Professor Kennedy, you characterize yourself as an ambivalent retributivist in the book in regards to the mere words doctrine, which governs that assault of speech does not justify a violent response. Essentially, your position is that while ideally one should control their emotions when confronted with hate speech, the weight of the word nigger and the context in which it is used should be considered on a case-by-case basis. Could you elaborate?
Sure. I'm glad you mentioned that, because thus far I've given short shrift to the legal angle, and we wouldn't want to do that now, would we? Let me give you, this is the way this comes up. This is how nigger figures in the law of homicide. Imagine that I leave this church right now, and somebody calls me nigger outside, clearly intending to insult me. And let's imagine that I respond violently and kill the person. Question: can I make use of a certain doctrine, the doctrine of provocation, to diminish my criminal liability? If I kill a person under those circumstances, I have committed a crime. There's no two ways about that. But there is a question about what sort of crime I may have committed. In different jurisdictions handle this issue differently. I'm not a member of the Bar of Massachusetts, but I am a member of the Bar of the District of Columbia. And in the District of Columbia, if I did what I just noted, I would not be able to argue to a jury that my criminal liability ought to be diminished on the grounds that I was provoked, on grounds that, yes, I did something wrong, but the law should, in a sense, show a bit of sympathy to my human frailty, because after all, he called me that word. There are a bunch of classic instances of provocation. The most classic instance of provocation is when somebody goes home and finds their spouse in amorous embrace of another, and then shoots the other or shoots the spouse. The person has committed a criminal act, but that's a classic instance where the criminal culpability in most places is diminished somewhat. This issue has come up in various places in the United States. Like I said, in Washington, D.C., they have what's called the mere words doctrine. The mere words doctrine says that mere words, no matter how hurtful, no matter how insulting, offer no basis for a provocation instruction to a jury. If this happened in California, I would be able to get to a jury. Now, let me give you one real episode in which it wasn't exactly provocation, but it was a close cousin of provocation where this arose. This is another, I think, very memorable case. In the late 1940s, the following happened in Washington, D.C. A black janitor at the National Cathedral got in an altercation with a white woman, and the white woman called him nigger. There was this altercation, turns violent, and the man kills the woman. The man is prosecuted for first-degree murder. In Washington, D.C., at that time, anybody who was convicted of first-degree murder automatically went to death row. This man had the great good fortune of having a wonderful attorney, this defendant. The defendant's attorney was the great Charles Hamilton Houston, another Harvard Law School grad. He was the teacher of Thurgood Marshall at the Howard University Law School, one of the great people in the one of the great jurists in the 20th century. And Houston said to the court, I should be able to argue to the jury that this guy's criminal liability ought to be diminished somewhat given the history of this word, given the history of this particular man, given all of the circumstances. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. The Supreme Court of the United States ruled against Charles Hamilton Houston. The man was executed. Now, I mean, the case in and of itself is interesting enough, but there's another chapter to this story, because this particular episode came to the attention of Richard Wright, the great novelist, and Richard Wright wrote a short story based on this episode called The Man Who Killed a Shadow. And so, again, for purposes of trying to situate this word, it's not only a word that figures in the annals of the case law of the United States, but it's a word that figures very prominently in some of the classic texts of American literature. That was in the late 1940s. Yeah, I think it was. I'm not sure exactly, but it's in my notes.
Did Shakespeare ever use the word, and was the response to the title what you expected? And even specifically, even if you expected the general response, were there any specific things that surprised you?
With respect to Shakespeare, I don't know. I'll take a look. I don't know. With respect to the title, like I said, I did not expect the sensationalism critique. I felt that there would be opposition of various sorts, but I didn't think it would take that particular turn.
Last question. Go ahead.
Hi, I run a human service day program, and part of our population is young African American men. And the word is very alive and well in my program. And even though it's used as a term of endearment and affection, I don't know if this is an accurate interpretation on my part, and I guess I'm asking if your research shows that it is. That there's still attached the same stereotypes as the derogatory use of the word, and a kind of self-hatred attached even to the term when it's used as a term of affection.
It can. I have no doubt that some of the time when one hears it, that's exactly what's going on. Certainly, I think of my own encounters with this particular term. I don't remember the first time that I heard the term, actually. It's been part of my life throughout. I mean, I've heard it in, I think, every iteration. But I have no doubt that some of the time this sort of self-denigration is being voiced through the use of this term. Absolutely. I have no doubt that that's true. But I also have no doubt that that's not the whole story. I also have no doubt that there are people who use it and they are not engaged and are not afflicted with a self-denigrating mindset. You all have been very attentive. I'm very appreciative. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Randall Kennedy. You have been listening to a program of Cambridge Forum, a free public forum in Harvard Square, Cambridge, Massachusetts, co-sponsored by the First Parish in Cambridge, Unitarian Universalist, the Lowell Institute, and the Friends of Cambridge Forum. For an audio cassette of this program entitled Nigger, The Strange Career of a Troublesome Word, featuring Randall Kennedy, recorded in April 2002, send a check or money order for $12 to Cambridge Forum, 3 Church Street, Cambridge, Massachusetts, 02138, or visit us on the web at www.cambridgeforum.org. Thank you for joining us. Professor Kennedy will be here to sign books. We have copies available at a 20% discount at the back table. Please join us. If you have a moment to fold the one chair, we would very much appreciate it. Thank you for coming. One more quick note. Next week, April 10th, feminist theologians Rita Nakashima Brock and Rebecca Ann Parker discuss religion, violence, and women. We hope to see you. Thank you.